Hi, welcome to Beyond Politics. I'm Catherine Clark. Conservative Cabinet Minister Peter MacKay is one of this country's best-known politicians. Despite the fact that his father, Elmer, served in cabinet before him, Peter had a promising career in law, and it was no sure thing that he would run for political office. But he did in 1997, and he's seen a lot of change on the Canadian political scene since that time. He's had a lot of personal change, too. He's recently married, and they are expecting their first child. Peter MacKay joins me now to talk all about his life beyond politics. Peter MacKay, it's great to have you here. Welcome to Beyond Politics.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you, Catherine.
Well, I'm thrilled because I have to say it's been a while that we've been trying to get you on the show, and I am thrilled that it's finally, that the magic has happened.
Well, you provide the magic.
I'm
really happy to have a chance to sit down and chat with you.
Well, that's great, and I mean, my gosh, you've had a busy year. You've had not even a year yet. You've got your obviously very busy political career, but you're newly married.
Yes.
And you're going to be a dad in the new year.
It's very exciting.
You got a lot going on. Yeah. So give me a sense of how you manage to keep you juggle all the balls that go on and you're kind of throwing up into the air in your life.
Well, that's the quintessential question, isn't it, for anyone who's busy, is trying to find that elusive balance in your life between work and family life and time, in the case of politicians in Canada, federal politicians, being in your constituency while carrying on your work here in Ottawa. So it does take more planning, and obviously when you have someone in your life who you're sharing your life with, trying to balance their schedule too is equally challenging. Yeah. So Nazanin and I will often sit down and just match our schedules on a weekly or monthly basis.
Yeah.
But it does, and it takes compromise. You have to decide what events are a priority, what events must you do versus those that you'd like to do. So it's a constant state of discussion and compromise over schedule.
I think also because what sometimes people forget about cabinet ministers is that they don't just have their cabinet duties, they have their constituency duties as well.
Oh, absolutely.
And so there's always, when you're looking at your schedule, that concern about not offending or upsetting your constituents as well. Also being in the riding and showing that you are in fact still their MP, not just a cabinet minister.
Absolutely right, and that isn't true of every system. America, for example, their cabinet ministers are not elected; they're selected by the president. And so what you do is exactly what you've described. You must have a presence in your riding. You must be there for significant events. I live in Nova Scotia, and I have for most of my life, and I feel very comfortable, very attached to that part of the world. But I think it is particularly expected in Atlantic Canada. I can't speak to other regions.
That's interesting.
But there is a very high expectation that you will be at volunteer firefighter appreciation nights and 50th wedding anniversaries, in addition to what we experience in the summer, and I'm sure it's true in many places, is festivals. And we have the Highland Games and Festival of the Tartans and many come-home events where people want to see you and they want to have that kind of direct interaction, not to mention being home on the weekends and being at the grocery store or filling up your car at the gas station.
Sure.
And you simply you stay connected and you stay very close to the way people are thinking. And in fact, that's fundamental to democracy, is knowing what issues are on people's mind and then how you translate that into your daily work and represent them in the House of Commons in a way that they feel comfortable with.
One of the things that I've always felt about the Atlantic provinces is that it's populated by probably some of the friendliest people on earth, and they're always willing to tell you what they're thinking, and they're always up for a chat. And that has got to be a tricky thing to navigate as a member of Parliament, because you mentioned filling your car up with gas or going to the grocery store. And those are two prime spots where you're going to get cornered. You're going to get cornered as you fill up, or you're going to get cornered over the radishes. How do you navigate that when you're in the riding? I mean, are you open all the time to having a chat with people, or are you able to say, you know, I'm really sorry, I'd love to talk to you, but I have to get somewhere?
Well, you know, first of all, I'm glad to hear you say that you have that impression of Atlantic Canada, because I think it's true. I think people are very open, very friendly. They give you the time of day. There's not the same sense of rush or constant urgency that I find sometimes in other parts of the world. People genuinely, when they ask you, how are you doing, they really want to know how you're doing. It's not just a turn of phrase. But it is challenging. You know, I almost find I have to change gears when I go back to Nova Scotia. And, you know, I'm at the stoplight and come on. and then I realize, okay, decompress.
Yeah.
You know, you're back home.
That's right. You don't want to have a case of road rage in your ride.
Not at all. But the reality is, when you do have urgent demands, and it's particularly true of national defense, I can't deny the fact that there is a constant sense of urgency and demand on your time, and that's natural. It's because of the size of the department, the international component, the reality that there is often life and death situations that you're drawn into in this department. But back in the riding, people genuinely do want to know that you're taking the time to give them a hearing. I spend constituency days in the office where we'll take appointments, and people will come in and talk to you about what's on their mind. And very often there will be national issues that come up in those meetings. And as you say, those chance encounters that you have that are random very often result in an in-depth discussion about an issue of the day or something very personal to them. And so you have to give people your attention and focus. And so that, again, requires some understanding on the part of a spouse.
Right.
You know, if I go to the Canadian Tire store to pick up a screwdriver or something,
Yep.
I may be gone for 2 hours because you do encounter people. And, you know, Christmas shopping is always a joy because you can't go and pick up items at the mall. You're going to be there for a while because you're going to run into a lot of people and run into your neighbors. And I love that about home. But it is, it sometimes does pull you in different directions when you're trying to be respectful of your family time, the time that you dedicate to work, and at the same time balancing all of the demands that come with cabinet, family, personal time.
You were no stranger to politics because your dad was a politician himself, was a cabinet minister. So you would have had some preparation for what was to come. But I wonder, you talked about your time as a lawyer. Why did you choose to leave the practice of law and to go into politics yourself? A lot of people would think that it was just because it's what you felt you were going to do as a child of a politician.
Well, it's an interesting question because the reality is I wasn't as involved in politics growing up. My parents split when I was quite young. And so while I obviously saw my father, he was here for the most part. And you grew up in a political family as well. So not only was there the fact that my dad was very busy, and it was a different time where people, I think, that came from outside Ontario came here and would stay for longer periods of time before returning to their ridings throughout the 70s and the 80s. And so I didn't have that same exposure to politics that you might have had, for example. But I was obviously aware of my father's position and his role in politics, and I spent time with him on occasion, but I was not active in politics. I wasn't, to be completely honest with you, involved in youth politics throughout my life. It was in fact quite late in life, after I was practicing law, working in the Crown Attorney's office, that I attended a meeting where Jean Charest was speaking in Halifax. And it was almost a chance encounter where he approached me, and at that time was attempting to rebuild the Progressive Conservative Party. Obviously, he'd served with my father and yours.
Yes.
And asked me, would you be interested in politics? Would this be something you would ever want to pursue as a career?
Were you surprised by the question?
I was, but it's probably a natural question given the fact that my dad was in politics.
People always ask it.
And I'm sure you get asked on occasion, will you ever go into politics? But at that point, I hadn't given it much thought. But it was, like everything in life, it was timing. And I was involved in a number of cases, pretty serious criminal law cases, where people were victimized. I was prosecuting some very high-profile cases involving the Youth Criminal Justice Act, then the Young Offenders Act. And I was frustrated with the way the legal system was operating. I was frustrated with the law itself in some ways, in which I felt victims were re-victimized. I felt a certain compunction to try to do something about that, to try to change the way the legal system was working. And I knew instinctively, and having studied law, but then as a practitioner, that the only way that you were going to effectively or perhaps most directly change the law was go where the laws were made.
Right.
And it was at that time and that meeting with Jean Charest that the wheels began to turn. Well, perhaps this is something I should seriously consider. Contrary to what some might think, my father was probably the most surprised person that I decided to go into politics.
Was he supportive?
He was.
What about your mom? Because your mom had seen the other side of it.
Yeah, I think my mom probably had, and in fact I know she had more concern, trepidation about the decision to go into politics. And, to be completely frank with you, my mother was as big or perhaps even bigger an influence on me growing up.
Right.
And my mother, while not political in the sense that she pursued public office, was equally active politically in the sense that she was involved in many different community-based organizations. She was quite instrumental in moving the women's health issue to the forefront. She worked in a number of organizations throughout Nova Scotia, but nationally, for equal rights for women. She was very international, is very international in her outlook, and so she had traveled extensively. And I was exposed through her eyes to a lot of issues that are still important to me. So she was very influential in the person that I am today.
But they both basically gave you their seal of approval that
absolutely.
Support you, and they'd vote for you. That's helpful too.
I think so, although my mother really can't vote for me because she lives in a different part of the province. But I think she probably would vote for me. I'd have to make the case, though.
Would you?
I wouldn't take her vote for granted ever.
Well, that's actually probably useful, isn't it, to have someone that is that you always have to, your sounding board, I guess.
Yeah, and that's, I'm really fortunate that way. I've had really a blessed life in the sense that I spent a lot of time with both of my sets of grandparents from both sides of the family. And while my father lived a very busy life, he deliberately made time for us on weekends. My mother was working full-time, went back to school and got her master's degree, but was very conscious of the fact, and there were 4 kids. So we had to compete for her time.
Sure.
But she, to this day, I have a wonderful relationship with my parents. And my mother has been involved in the peace movement. And again, people think that this is perhaps counterintuitive that a defense minister could have a mother in the peace movement. But she is very reasoned. She's a very thoughtful person. And like my wife, when people maybe put a negative inference on my being defense minister, they'll say, he's not the minister of war.
Yes.
And in order for peace to emerge, there has to be, in some cases, a military there. Just as we need police in society, we have to have a military that can back up foreign policy.
Absolutely. I also think it would not be a very wise person who would approach either your mother or your wife to say anything negative.
Well, you'd be surprised.
I know, it's true, isn't it? Yeah. You talked about being 4 kids, and I learned through some research that you worked up in the Arctic for a couple of summers.
I did.
When you were in your late teens. Were you encouraged as kids to go out and get your own jobs and to, take care of yourselves, bring in your own income?
We were all very independent at an early age, and I worked at a gas station in high school. Every summer, I had a number of jobs, whether it be on the farm. We always made our own hay, and we had a big vegetable garden. But we raked blueberries at a nearby farm. I had a job working for a cable television company,
Did you?
But as a linesman. So I was out running the cable and climbing telephone poles, which was a spectacular way to keep in shape in the summer.
I bet.
And great outdoors work, and I always enjoyed that time. Made a lot of great friends, and I was quite active in sport too. So it was always busy. There was always something going on in our house. And my father has a daughter by second marriage, and I consider her my sister as well. So it was a busy household, and always lots of games, always lots of activity going on. We were seldom inside.
When you say games, do you mean pranks? Or do you mean games?
Well, both. We had, I consider my siblings my best friends, and we would prank each other a lot. But we were often playing, we played organized baseball and hockey, not so much soccer, but we would actually play with all of the neighborhood kids, and we had a big crowd that would gather around the farmhouse where we were in the summer, and we'd play all day, and there was a stream nearby where we would go and swim, and it was almost an idyllic lifestyle for a kid, because there was never a shortage of things to do.
What you've just described and talked about is a real outdoor element, a real outdoor thread that seems to run or have run through your life, but continues to run through your life. I mean, you're very well known for your athletic pursuits. You're known as being an athletic person. But was that just something that was encouraged as a kid, or was it by happenstance of where you lived that the outdoors became such an important part of your life?
Well, I always enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the competition. I enjoyed being around other people, playing team sports. Rugby and football and baseball were the sports that I played the most, but was involved in track when I was in high school, and always really enjoyed just athletic pursuit. And quite frankly, all of the family were like that, and my parents encouraged us to be involved. I remember, getting up very early to go to hockey practice, and then I would get up early sometimes and take my little brother to hockey practice. So that was just part of growing up in rural Nova Scotia. But I want to come back to your question about the Arctic.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about that.
That was a really unique experience to go there.
You worked on a merchant supply vessel?
It was a supply ship that sailed out of a little town called Mulgrave in the Strait of Canso area, and we were bringing supplies up to the high Arctic. So all along the coast of what they used to call the Dew Line, to little communities like Pond Inlet, Nanisivik, Grise Fjord, all of these places that were very isolated, and you could only get to these communities at certain times of the year when the ice had melted. And so a massive supply ship with containers on board and below deck, and I was a stevedore or a heavy machine operator, depending on where we were. And so it was very tough physical work, dangerous at times when I think back on it, but it gave me exposure to such an amazing part of our country very early in life. So to gain an appreciation of the vastness of the country, the diversity of seeing Aboriginal people, our Inuit people living in the north, saw some of their challenges early in my life, and how they lived, in some cases, a very traditional life, but an attempt to modernize and the conflict that sometimes caused in their lives. But I think back on some of those early experiences when I've been there with the military for Arctic operations, going to some of the very same communities, and to see the change, to see the evolution of what's happening to the environment in the north, which is also incredibly poignant, to go to places where they were once completely encased in ice, now open water.
Right. Wow.
So the changes are very real to me because I've seen them. And there's a tremendous affection that Canadians have for the Arctic.
It kind of defines who we are in a way, doesn't it? I mean,
it is.
I don't know that it's necessarily the right definition of us as a nation, but even internationally, when people think of Canada, they think of the land of snow and ice. And that really is the Arctic. They think of polar bears.
It's true. And in fact, very few Canadians, percentage-wise, would ever see it firsthand. But there is this tremendous intrinsic affection for the North. And as you say, it's part of our identity. And yet, 40% of Canada's land mass is above that 60th parallel. Yeah. And yet, it's really only about 100,000 people. But talking to people like Leona Glukak, Peter Panashaway, who are in our government, I've also come to understand, the challenges that they have. I have a big rural riding with 2 coastlines and lots of small communities. In their case, they have massive territory to cover.
And not always accessible.
Not always accessible,
especially
in the winter months.
Which lasts a long time.
And it's pitch dark and minus 40.
Yeah. What was it like for you, given the fact that it was summer, but it was still the Arctic, to be up there and to be on a ship for that amount of time?
Well, it is a new experience when you're used to kind of running around and having freedom of movement everywhere, and you're basically on that ship for 2 months, and you're traveling. You're off the ship when you reach port, and you're unloading equipment. But we had, the first time I went, we had the experience of being trapped in the ice. The winds had changed, and it actually came in behind the ship, and we were trapped in a place called Pond Inlet. So we ended up having to remove a lot of the equipment and containers via helicopter with slings. So it was work.
Yeah.
You were there. You spent most of your waking hours doing quite physical manual labor, and there was a bit of a race against the clock. You would get into a port, unload as quickly and as efficiently as possible, and then move on to the next one. So when we became trapped in the ice for this period, we were behind schedule. So that necessitated us
working extra hard.
But I suppose from a young person's point of view, the best part of it was you had one big paycheck
at the end,
and so your school and all of I did all the responsible things, and I bought a sports car.
I was going to ask if was this the Chevy Corvette that I understand?
Yes.
That's what you bought out of.
You got a good memory.
Okay. So you still have that car?
I still have that car, although I must say...
Do you drive it?
Not very often. It's in the garage at home, but take it out once in a while.
Okay, for a spin.
Just for a spin. Dust it off.
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to skip forward a bit because you are recently married, and you have married a woman who came to your marriage an independent person in her own right, her own interests, her own opinions, her own career. That's sometimes tough in politics, and certainly the opinion part in a spouse is not always welcomed in politics. And I wonder how the two of you are working to ensure that she still is able to maintain her independence while being married to a very high-profile politician.
Well, Catherine, it's working very well, to be honest with you. I have such enormous respect for Nazanin, and in addition to the love that I feel for her, I know that she is somebody who has done so much in really a short time for many, many people. She's dedicated herself, as you know, to directly assisting children who are on death row, families and people mainly of Iranian descent, but she has branched out into all kinds of other areas of assisting people who are in need. She's written a book about this, as you know. And
The Two Nazanines.
The Tale of Two Nazanines, which chronicles this story of a young Iranian woman who was 17, I believe, at the time, arrested for defending herself from an attempted rape, wherein she, as part of her defense, stabbed somebody and was charged with murder and sentenced to death. And Nazanin heard about this online, took up this cause, gathered a petition of hundreds of thousands of names, went to the United Nations, helped her get a lawyer, and through her efforts and the efforts of many was able to have this young woman eventually exonerated of the crime And the corollary to this book, where it sort of ends, and I would encourage people to get the book because it's a very good story and a very compelling read. But she has since made contact again with this young woman, and she's doing okay, but it's a very tough existence. And Nazanin was born in Iran, moved to originally Spain, then came to Toronto, and eventually her family settled in Vancouver. And the early experience of her life and how it shaped her family, their story is intertwined with the lives of many, many Canadians.
Yeah, it's interesting in that regard, isn't it? Because so many Canadians do have that experience of Canada being their chosen country. Exactly. So coming here and bringing a different perspective and a different background to the country.
And I think in some cases the experience outside Canada has really helped people formulate an appreciation of what we have. This is the greatest country in the world. And when I hear my wife speak about her appreciation for Canada and all that it represents, and the freedoms and the democracies and the human rights that we enjoy, that we have the privilege of enjoying, versus her place of birth, or many other countries that we could name, that has really inspired me. And I mean, and that's a word I don't use lightly. She is somebody who I just find a joy to be around. We obviously have different views, different backgrounds, but there's a meeting of the minds on most things. And the biggest challenge, as I mentioned at the outset, is really trying to ensure that we're making sufficient time for one another. Right. And with a baby coming in March, that will require even greater effort.
Yes, it is.
To say the least, as you've experienced.
Well, and we're almost out of time, but I'm wondering about the baby. And I mean, first of all, congratulations, because it's wonderful. But how are you feeling? Are you worried? Are you excited? Are you just not entirely sure what to expect?
Well, I'm a little nervous. I am very excited about it. This is something that I've truly always wanted to have children, and to some degree I put that part of my life aside, being involved in politics and having had the experience of sort of, I guess, seeing the toll that it can take on families. But we're very, very much looking forward to bringing a child into the world in this wonderful country of ours, working together to raise a child in a way that we hope will go well. I do have the benefit and the touchstone of my 4 siblings all having children.
Right. So you have people to call in an emergency.
There's a good hotline into my sisters and brother, and how do we handle this? No, they've been very supportive, and they're all excited too. There's a real ripple effect around the family, nice. And both my parents have been extremely excited and supportive.
Well, I do wish you the best of luck, and you'll have a busy year ahead, and I appreciate that you took the time now to chat. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Catherine.